I woke up that morning excited about the day's plans. It was Saturday morning, and I had been looking forward to this trip all week. I got up, dressed, brushed my teeth, and gathered my dog, Shiloh, into my car. Shiloh is a small beagle, Dachshund mix, and is almost 8 years old, young enough to still have energy, but would still prefer to get pampered on the couch. She has a very love-hate relationship with car rides, where she's only happy if the windows are down. I wasn't looking forward to the inevitable whining that would happen on the highways when the windows need to be up. The road trip was over 2 hours one way. I live in Washington and have for over 3 years. I love the scenery, and on my weekends I try my best to make time to do some kind of road trip. This particular road trip was to Johannesburg Falls. It is one of the tallest waterfalls in Washington and basically my favorite spot to visit so far. It was late June, so the falls had just opened again from being closed down for the winter. This was my first trip there since last year. I was so unbelievably excited when I walked outside and noticed basically a cloudless sky. I had been to the falls a few times and it was always covered at the top with clouds. I was looking forward to potentially seeing the actual top of the mountains. I kissed my fiancé goodbye, told him when I felt like I should be back, and headed out. I put Shiloh in the backseat in her seatbelt harness, which she of course loathes, and headed out of Seattle. The journey itself was really uneventful. Shiloh would occasionally whine due to both the windows being rolled up and being in her trapped in the backseat. I listened to a horror podcast I had recently found the whole trip. This podcast was much darker than I was used to, with a lot more gore and disgusting sounds in the background. It actually made my stomach hurt a few times. I loved it nonetheless. There is no signal past a certain spot, so when I lost signal to the podcast I was rather upset. After about an hour and a half, I finally arrived to the one-way street that dead ends at the falls. The one-way street is one of the worst roads I had ever been on. The road is mostly gravel and has so many potholes you cannot take your eyes off the road for even a second or you might damage your car. This road takes up to an hour to drive, depending on how fast you're willing to drive. I was driving that long, stressful road for about 45 minutes, not passing a single car. That wasn't out of the ordinary and just made me happy there were less people there today. I rounded a corner where I came to a spot filled with a bunch of parked cars. I went a little further to see the road was blocked off. I was so disappointed. No way had I driven this far not to see the falls on such a beautiful day. So I decided to hike the rest of the way. I figured I was only about a mile from the top. I parked my car among the tightly parked cars, put Shiloh on a leash, and went under the barrier. The hill was awful. It was straight uphill the entire way, and I am absolutely not in the best of shape. I ended up passing an old couple with hiking sticks on their way up the hill. The old man said, "You're lucky you have a dog to help pull you up this hill." I laughed and continued on. The beautiful falls were off to our left. I stopped multiple times to take some pictures, but really wanted to get to the actual top of the road to get pictures head on. It was hotter than I was expecting it to be. I didn't have cell service, so I wasn't able to look it up, but it had to have been 90. Shiloh was dragging herself up the road. I hadn't planned on hiking, so I hadn't brought any water with me. I had been here a handful of times in the past. I've never needed water due to the road ending at the very top. I began to get worried she would pass out from overexhaustion. This had happened once before when we went to Niagara Falls. She fell over from exhaustion. I had to pick her up and carry her to vendor and beg them to get me some water. They didn't take credit cards, which was all I had. 2 very nice men behind me basically gave her their whole water bottle. She was fine after that, but I never want that kind of fear again. There are strong rivers all around us, but there was no way to get water from them without potentially getting swept away. I kept going, hoping I could find a place for her to drink. I had gone maybe half a mile when I came to a spot that allowed her to step in and drink. It was a whirlpool type area that was slow enough for her to be able to get in and drink. She was even able to lay down and get her belly wet. I was so relieved. After I passed the old couple, there was no one else on the street. I kept wondering where all of the people that owned those cars were. I also had the sudden realization that there could be bears. I don't know much about bears. I don't know if you should run or stand still. I knew my dog Shiloh wouldn't be able to stand up to a bear, of course. Honestly, I was afraid she would make a bear encounter way worse. I became hyper aware of my surroundings. As Shiloh was drinking, I was looking around to see if I could see anyone or anything. Only things I could see were trees, mountains, and rivers. I decided to turn around at that point. I wasn't sure how much longer Shiloh could take this heat, and to be honest, I was getting scared. Maybe it was the podcast I had been listening to that made me paranoid. I had no cell service. I was in the middle of nowhere on a dead-end road, and I hadn't seen anyone in probably 30 minutes. My fiancé knew I was here, but it would be many hours before he would suspect something was wrong. We started back down the hill with only the sounds of the river as company. I looked around trying to catch anything out of the usual. Even tried to come up with escape plans if we were to see a bear. Could I hide behind this rock or slide down this hill and hope I make it to the bottom alive? How fast can I run downhill? The longer we went, the more paranoid I got. I hadn't seen the old couple yet. I was sure I should have passed them by now. They had been dressed for a full hike. So I thought they had planned to go to the top, even with the rivers. Everything seemed to become more quiet, like someone had reduced the volume with a remote. I began to feel like someone was watching me. My stomach was in knots. I decided to run at this point, looking behind me to make sure nothing was there. There wasn't anything there. I know we should be at the curve in the road with the car by now. Where was the old couple? Had they turned around and gone back? It's not easy running down a steep hill. So I had to slow my pace back down, afraid I would fall and injure myself. I couldn't even imagine how bad that would have been. Finally, the curve in the road that led to the car. I walked a little faster now, just wanting to get to my car. We went under the barrier and I came to an abrupt stop. Not a single car was there. My car wasn't there. Had I miscalculated? There weren't any turns the whole way, so I couldn't have gotten lost. I kept walking some more, hoping to see at least one car. Nothing, just trees. What? Where was my car? Where are the 10 or so other cars that were parked here? I hadn't passed a single soul other than the old couple. Where is everyone, and how could they have left without passing me? I began to feel like someone was watching me again. I looked around but couldn't make anything out through the dense forest around us. Shiloh didn't seem to be worried, just panting from the heat. We started walking further down the hill, hoping to pass someone and let them know the situation. We got maybe a mile further down when got worried again about Shiloh getting overheated. There weren't any rivers down this far, so we went back up the road again so we can get to that spot where she could drink some water. There wasn't anyone the whole way back up. The volume of the forest was still low. When I finally made it back up to the spot with the rivers, it had to have been what I assume was an hour and a half since I had lost my car. I was extremely thirsty and got some water myself. It was so cold and refreshing. I sat on a nearby rock to think about what to do. Where was everyone? Where was my car? Where did all of those cars go? I began to feel eyes on me again. I looked around nervously to again not see anything. I looked at my phone to see it was 1:30. Only 30 minutes since I pulled up. That cannot be right. I had been here at least 2 hours by now. I looked up to see the sun seemed to be in the same spot. I figured there had to be people at the top that hadn't come back down yet. I got up from the rock to start up the hill again, when I realized my surroundings were all but muted. Even the river right next to me dropped in volume. I ran up the hill with Shiloh in tow, running as fast as I could, looking behind me constantly. Again, nothing behind me. What felt like hours. I was finally at the top. I looked around to see no one. Knowing there should be people here, I began to hyperventilate. Where the fuck was everyone? There were the restrooms in the center of the parking lot. Suddenly having to pee, I went in to use them, bringing Shiloh with me. Even in the bathroom, I felt someone was watching me. I looked down at my phone again to see the time, and it still read only 1:30. What the fuck? Was my phone broken? I looked at the pictures I had taken of the mountains earlier to see that they were taken at 1 p.m. The journey to the town would take hours. It was still blazing hot with nothing to hold water. What can I do? Walk back down hoping to pass a car. Wait at the top for someone to show up. I walked back out of the bathroom looking at my phone, confused when I felt it. The deepest feeling of dread I had ever felt in my life. I looked up to see a figure standing in front of me about 50 feet away. It was completely black with no clothes on, long and very thin. Its eyes were yellow and its arms were too long. It was tall, maybe 8 feet. It was hazy around the edges, like it was blurred. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. Shiloh began growling at it. I started to back up but tripped over the leash that had somehow gotten wrapped around my feet. I got up, ran back into the bathroom and locked the door, silent tears running down my cheeks. I backed into the corner and started sobbing. Shiloh was facing the door, still growling, with her fur sticking up. The bathroom had no windows by the entrance and the door was flush with the ground, so I couldn't see if the creature had followed me or not. The door started vibrating. I could feel the ground shaking under me. Dirt started falling from the ceiling. I screamed with my hands over my mouth, trying to stay as quiet as I could, knowing Shiloh was growling next to me. I knew it was useless. I heard a low chuckle creep through the door and the building stopped shaking. I stayed in there for what felt like hours after everything quieted. My phone still read 1:30. Shiloh had eventually stopped growling and had been sleeping next to me. My stomach was rumbling and I knew we were both getting dehydrated. After many more hours, I passed out. I woke up to a loud knocking on the door. I could hear voices through the walls. A woman's voice called through the door. Hello, is anyone in here? My daughter has to use the restroom. Still terrified. I slowly stood up. I glanced down at my phone to see it was 4:30 p.m. What had happened? Shiloh seemed much happier now. I felt okay enough to open the door a crack. I saw a middle-aged blonde woman with an unhappy look on her face. I opened the door without saying a word and crept out of the bathroom. There weren't any cars, but there were a dozen or so people with hiking sticks and backpacks. The sun was lower to the ground now and it was slightly cooler. Is it over? Where was the black figure? The entire way down the hill I passed half a dozen people on their way up the mountain. Still paranoid, I kept a vigilant eye on the woods surrounding us. Turning around that major turn, I prayed my car would be there. Going under the barrier, I saw a bunch of cars with mine being towards the back. I cried and ran to my car. I pulled Shiloh in and sped down the mountain. Potholes be damned. When I finally got to an area with service, I called my fiance and asked how long I had been gone. He said, "You've been gone for 6 hours. I was starting to get a little worried. Are you on your way home now? I cried and said I would be home in about an hour. I went as fast as I could without potentially getting pulled over, only stopping for 2 waters at a gas station. When we got home, I hugged my fiance and then went to bed and passed out with Shiloh under the covers by my side. Needless to say, I will never go back to Johannesburg Falls. I still don't know what happened. I have no idea what that thing was. I don't think I ever will.